Welcome to the, I don't know how many of these we've had now, the Urbanism lunch hour, which has become a regular part of the Academy calendar, open to members. I'm David Rudlin, as you probably know, stepped down as chair of the Academy in January. So it's nice to be back chairing an event. Just to make sure that you're all aware that this event is being recorded. So if you don't want yourself recorded, make sure your camera's off and your microphone's muted. We will be collecting questions as we go through, so can you do that on the chat box so that we can see the questions? I will draw questions from those later in the event. If you can also, when you do that, include your name so that we know who you are and we can call you by name. You can do that on the Zoom thing. Also, Twitter, please use the hashtag Urbanism Lunch Hour. So with that, we have two excellent speakers today. We're going to go through both presentations and then have questions afterwards. We have Christopher Martyn, founding director of Urban Movement, who you will be aware, one of the very few good guys in terms, that's not fair. One of the good guys in terms of highways and engineering, one of the people who really do it from an urbanist perspective. He's also a director of the Urban Design Group, and we've been working together recently on the urban design, the place design unit proposal that we've been putting to government. We then have Martyn Evans, who is creative director at U&I. Again, you will need no introduction. They host our awards every December and are supporters of the Academy, for which we're very grateful. Martyn is also a fellow columnist of mine on Building Design magazine, and I'm sure you've been seeing his comments. So with that, we're going to go straight into the presentations. It's about behaviour change, about how creative generation can bring about behaviour change today. So with that, can I pass you on to Christopher Martyn?
Thanks, David. I'll just share my screen. Brilliant. A pleasure to be speaking to you this Friday. As David said, I'm Christopher Martyn, Director of Urban Movement. Also have roles at Living Streets, the UN and Urban Design Group. I'm also in desperate need of a lockdown haircut, so apologies in advance if I need to keep moving it off my face. But back to the task at hand. Recently, I've been reflecting a lot that never before have sort of government, the press, and the general public been as interested in the design of our towns and cities as we are today. And we've heard obviously so much about what COVID-19 means for towns and cities, the way we will live, the way we'll move, and the way we'll work. And this is likely because now more than ever, we've been made acutely aware of the negative effects that certain urban conditions can have on our lives. Yet for the most part, we've been living with these urban conditions for some time. Before living with this particular crisis, we were living with others. Notable health crises, a loneliness crisis, and air quality crisis. And of course, also inclusivity crises, social justice crisis, and of course a climate crisis. But rather than being separate, these crises are certainly linked, and have been shown to even exacerbate the current health pandemic. And for the large part, they are the result of the environments we've chosen to deliver. So I don't want to go back, I want to go forwards. And for me, the question is not whether we need cities and density, as some have questioned, because I think that's a nonsense. It's whether we have the vision, the drive, the staying power to make cities equitable, affordable, and sustainable, as well as dense, creative, and fun. My professional focus is on the public realm, as David said, how we interact with cities and places, how we move about them, importantly, and how we enjoy them. Because how we do these things and how we design these things is at the heart of delivering social justice and quality of life for all, in my opinion. This is a worn-out quote, but the message is there. Going forward from today, I think we need to change the way we think about our cities, streets, and public realm, first and foremost as a catalyst for tackling the challenges we face. And this will mean that we need to change behaviour. But people really freak out when you say that. Where people have lived in places in which the space... Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you have to make your PDF view full screen.
Yeah, we're only seeing part of it.
Because we...
There we go.
If you go on the toolbar...
That was better.
Okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
All right, fine.
I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, thanks for saying. Challenges of a small screen. But where people have lived in places in which the space between buildings has been conformed to the commodity of the car for a long time, their behaviors are inevitably shaped with the result that this way of life, it gets viewed by many as their culture. And this, of course, makes the issue of changing behaviors a great deal more challenging, as people do not see improvements in urban design and transport projects as making cities better and trying to tackle crises. They see them instead as an attack on their culture. So we have to think creatively about this situation, I think. And this is where I think we have an opportunity, maybe the greatest design opportunity in history. You remember a few years back, the UN gave us a 12-year deadline to change the way we live, to present a crisis unlike we've ever seen before. 12 years is longer than it took Apple to get the concept of a smartphone into the hands of more than half the world's population. Following this through, we know why people change their behavior. So why would we focus on anything else other than this? If we need to change people's behavior, don't tell them to change, compel them. But in this way of thinking, we do have a problem. People who believe in these creative solutions do not have a model. In essence, we don't have a framework on which to hang our ideas. Engineers, mathematicians, and economists all have a very robust existing framework on which they can hang ideas and designs. But arguably, we only have a collection of insights without an overall model. And what this means is when developing solutions, society has probably given too much priority to technical solutions and not nearly enough to creative ones. This is because there's an imbalance in the way we treat creative, emotionally driven solutions versus the way we treat rational and mechanistic ideas. If you're looking at creative solutions, quite rightly, you have to share all your thoughts, ideas, working out and designs for approval by people more rational than you. But this doesn't apply the other way around. People who have an existing framework, an engineering or economic framework, feel that their logic is its own answer. What they don't say is, well, this all seems to add up, but before we sign it off, let's go show it to loads of artists and to designers to see if they can come up with something different, dare I say better. So with this, we are artificially prioritizing mechanistic ideas over creative and behavioral ideas. But at the end of the day, what we actually need is for people to change their behavior. One of the best improvements to passenger satisfaction on the London Underground per pound spent ever came not when we increased the number of trains, but when they installed information boards on the platforms telling you how long to the next train. Because waiting is not only judged on its numerical and mathematical qualities, but also its behavioral qualities in terms of a level of uncertainty you have about when the next train is going to arrive. Waiting for 10 minutes when you know it's 10 minutes is better than waiting 5 minutes when you don't know how long the next train will be. Another beautiful and entirely behavioral solution to road safety is from Korea, where they installed countdown clocks on red traffic lights. This is proven to reduce collisions and improve safety, essentially because irritation and annoyance is massively reduced when you know how long you'll be waiting for. By contrast, in China, maybe not fully understanding this, they installed countdown clocks on green traffic lights, which is a terrible idea. It basically encourages people to floor it from 200 meters away and they have 5 seconds left. The Korean government tested both, and road safety improves when you apply countdown on red lights. And my favorite illustration from the city of Stockholm, they wanted to stop people from driving fast through the city. So they installed radar cameras to measure the speed of passing cars. Those above the speed limit received an automatic fine, and those below were entered into a lottery to win the fines. The average speeds fell from 32 kilometers an hour to 25. So they successfully connected self-interest and societal good. And this is the key. This is the key as far as I'm concerned. How do we connect self-interest and societal good? How do we compel people to do what's best for the city, best for society, and best for themselves? And in essence, people base their transport choices understandably on the path of least resistance. If what is most enjoyable is to drive, we'll drive. And if what is most enjoyable is to walk, cycle, take public transport, we'll do that. And we have no choice in this. Human beings are governed by the law of least effort. The law asserts that if there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. So in a way, laziness is built into our nature. So we have to have an incentive, and there's no greater incentive in us, I would argue, than fun. We do so much because it is fun, even the things we might otherwise consider somewhat regrettable in the morning. And for me, this hedonism, this pursuit of pleasure, it's such a powerful driver for human beings. And I think the answer is in this. And I propose that we harness the power of hedonism for good and develop cities around an idea of hedonistic urbanism, which is essentially flying in the face of old adages that the sustainable option, the right thing to do, the watered down option, or the fat-free version is the right thing. It's making what is good for the planet, good for people, and good for cities the most enjoyable, the most fun, the most self-indulgent option, so people queue up for it. all well and good, I'm sure, but I thought I would share some ideas for what this might look like. We actually have to start inviting people to walk more, cycle more, and take mass transit more by making it far better than driving. And this means working hard to make it good, as well as working hard to discourage driving. Walking down the street and hanging out in a city should be an absolute ball. Look at these people enjoying themselves here. Now look at that guy there. Make sure he and the other people that have chosen to drive when they don't need to know they're missing out. And key to this agenda, of course, is that you have to give people something to walk to. And this is often a failing of a lot of new developments, as we've seen in recent publications. We all love a good queue jump as well. Prioritize people doing what is good. And then in that way, we can inspire more people to do it. So things like a simple side street. Stop breaking up journeys of people walking to wait for cars, change the relationship, and make vehicles have to wait to cross the pedestrian space. If we need people to do something, make that thing the most effortless and make what we'd rather people didn't do much more of a pain in the arse. If it snows or if it's icy, grit and clear the cycle tracks and footways first, before the car lanes. Then if people need to get somewhere, they'll pick the one you prioritize. Give people cycling somewhere to rest when they have to stop at the lights. And think about the little details, cycle parking with built-in saddle covers for when it rains and snows, for example. And even providing lockers with cycle parking so people can leave their ugly crap locked away when they head in for that big meeting. We have historically gone to extraordinary measures to make life easy for people driving in cities, despite the damage it does to the very joy of cities. Imagine what kind of places we'd achieve if we went to the same lengths to make it easier for people to walk up a hill to a metro station, for example. We have to soften cities for loads of environmental reasons, as well as shade, shelter, and relaxation. But when we create green space, we have to connect people with it. It's not an object just to look at. Nature is something that has to surround us all. It has to draw us in, and it has to envelop us to be successful. We have to think about whole journeys as well, crucially. We have to make the way of traveling that is most advantageous for society and places as a whole the most seamless. So treat bike parking how we've treated car parking for the last 50 years, with thoughtful design, repair stations, coffee shops, valets, and all accessed by convenient ramps, and stuff the car parking around the back in some corner where you know it probably won't be there when you get back. Only if we make serious invitations to all ages, all abilities, and all backgrounds will we succeed. It's common to hear that people are not walking, they're not cycling, they're not taking public transport, or hanging out in public spaces because they have children. So we should be actively designing infrastructure to directly remove these excuses by making it relaxing, enjoyable, and fun. And this applies to the planning system hugely as well. We should be planning and designing spaces so children can walk from their homes safely by themselves to the local shops, buy a popsicle, and get home before it melts. This takes the idea of a 15-minute city slightly further potentially and creates the popsicle city. It's said that sustainability is like teenage sex. Lots of people are doing it, few are doing it, and those that are doing it aren't doing it very well. We know what sustainability is, and we know truly sustainable places are the places that we're drawn to and the places that make us relax. We have to start collectively rejecting poor quality and only accepting the places that we know protect our health and provide decent hope for our children. And I think finally, as I said, fun is a huge driving factor in human beings. So let's harness it and invite people to have fun doing good. Make waiting for a bus a useful and an enjoyable moment in people's day. A place where you can pick up a new book, buy a coffee, pick up your dry cleaning, buy some fruit and veg, or just swing while you wait. Take everyday objects and invite play with them. Make walking, cycling, and public transport the most fun way to get about. Indeed, waiting at the traffic lights can be fun and sociable. Why not install collaborative games at pedestrian crossings? And make public spaces into the living rooms for the city, places for everyone to relax, interact with each other, and chat. People spend money in the places they enjoy. We make friends when we're relaxed. And it is in these places where we are indeed at our most human. And if you've created a place where people take their shoes off in public after a long walk around the city, I think it's safe to say you've succeeded. It's certainly relaxed. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Fantastic images there, although I'm not sure I believe the one about the grass, keep off the grass. It must have been photoshopped, surely. We're going to keep questions for later. I'm going to go straight on to Martyn, who's going to talk, I think, a little bit about you and I's work, but also how changing behaviour creatively has happened there. Martyn.
I was going to, let me just get to a point where I can share my screen. Can everybody see that all right?
Yeah.
So thanks, Chris, that was great. Really fantastic images. I'm just going to show you some pictures of some of our schemes and talk to you a little bit about creative regeneration from a developer's standpoint. So my constant mantra inside our company has always been that we are not property developers building property developments or schemes or developing sites, that we make places. And if we start our day thinking that, we'll be halfway down the road to great results without even trying. But it's quite hard in our industry that's very focused on money and legals and site boundaries and red lines on plans. It's a whole different language and a different way of thinking. So luckily for us, we have big schemes and they take a long time. And so from the very beginning that we take ownership or take control over a site, we have an opportunity to spend some time doing things while there's this huge engine of development activity going on in offices around the country. And this is one such place. This is Deptford High Street in South East London. This is what it looked like. The site we acquired from Lewisham Council is just behind this, what you can see here, this little row of shops and the building on the right. But that's a very typical gateway to a site that we might acquire to develop, because typically we acquire dead, miserable, ex-industrial infrastructure sites that have been empty and derelict for some time and have effectively got lost. And as you can see, the entrance to the site is covered by a stall, a market stall there. That guy didn't rent that pitch. He, in fact, it was the shop that you can't see just to the right of the picture, taking an opportunity of a bit of empty land to stick a stall out and increase his business entrepreneurial activity at its best. Why wouldn't he? So, hang on, I went a bit. Right, okay. So when you get behind that stall, that's what you see. It's a railway, a carriage ramp that took the Victorian freight carts up to the elevated train line that went into central London to Deptford High Street station. That piece of land had been empty for decades, and really the only reason that you would go there was to buy either sex or drugs, or to have something bad happen to you, to be attacked in some way. It was not a nice place, this little bit of land tucked around the back of Deptford High Street. This is what we planned. This is an early CGI, not a very good one, but an early CGI. And so the arches that you can see at the bottom of in the middle of the screen there, that's the visualization of the picture that we showed. So this is a scheme by Roger Stirk Harbour, residential and commercial building on the left, a market square in the middle there, with the arches all, those arches all cleaned out and turned into retail units. It was going to probably be 2 or 3 years before we were on site with this scheme. Relatively tricky planning, application, a lot of work to do. And typically developers like us, at that time when all of the money that we're spending is ours and doesn't come from a funder and is the money before planning at most high risk, we typically want to spend as little as possible. But that's the time at which it is most valuable to get out into the community and talk about what you want to do and listen and understand what people want and how they can help you to understand best what to build. And so rather than do the cheap and cost-effective thing, which is to stick a hoarding up and hire a security guard with a dog, we tend to want to open the gates of our sites and let people in. But of course, by definition, they're not very nice. And so we want to do 2 things. One, make them warm and inviting and welcoming, and that typically involves food and drink. But also to be able to start to change people's perceptions of place, because one of the tools, intangible tools, that's going to make this place work from being a dead, miserable, empty place to being an alive, productive community place is the changing perception of the people who are going to come and actually do it, who are going to come and work here and live here and engage with it and shop here. And so on one very cold February morning in 2008, we bought this and shipped it down the high street on a low loader. We literally, honestly, had to let the tyres out the wheels to get the thing underneath the bridge. We had about ½ an inch to spare. hired an artist called Morag Myerscough to paint and decorate it and convert it into this. And instead of that shop with the red awning, which had gone bust, in the interim time, we knocked it down, made the hole bigger, and parked this in the street and opened it as a cafe. And it was in 2009 that it got going, just when the world went crazy and our scheme went up on the shelf. And so in fact, this thing, which was meant to sit there for about a year, ended up being there for nearly 7 years and became a very established and loved part of the high street. It was run by this lady here as an independent business, but subsidized by us. But effectively what it became was a 7-year consultation exercise, because all of the people who worked in the cafe were trained to engage with the customers and talk about the future of the place. And so, and that then just became a huge funnel of information and understanding and engagement right up to the point at which we went to planning. We cleaned out the arches and we let them for pence, really, to local small businesses. There are some of them. And then in the yard in the middle, we engaged with those people who were typically artists or creatives or furniture makers, bought a load of shipping pallets and turned them into armchairs and put a cinema outside. I bought 2 telegraph poles and some parachutes off eBay for £45 and made a roof, and we made some cushions and ran films for 2-3 summers. We did this, and thousands of people came and sat outside, and you wear headphones and watch the film in your own little world, and we served popcorn and drinks, and so suddenly a miserable place becomes a really welcoming, warm and lovely place for relatively little money in the scheme of things, that engages with the community, and then also allows all of those people who are in those arches there to establish businesses that we could then find something to do with while we had to take them away and build the site and put them back in. And a number of them came back when the scheme was finished. And that scheme is now built, and the arches are being let, and it's just coming to life now as we speak. And if you haven't been down to Deptford Street, I would urge you to go and have a look. It's an interesting place. This is a painting that was made in 1906, and it is a factory in a farmland in west of London, in a little town called Hayes, that Christopher knows very well, because I just discovered at the beginning of our session today that we met over this project. This company came from America. It was called the Gramophone and Typewriter Company, and it came to West London to build gramophones. Very quickly, it developed the technology to make the records to play on those gramophones, and it started a record label called His Master's Voice to print those, press those records. And then over the decades through the 20th century, it became EMI, that company, and this turned into one of the largest factories in the UK, 150 acres, 25,000 people working there at its height in the 60s. It closed in the 1980s, and the last 4,000 people were made redundant. The town has never really recovered since, and the site, which had got smaller and smaller through the 70s and 80s, we bought 21 acres of it, and there it is in red on the site there, with the 4 or 5 of the old beautiful Art Deco buildings that were designed by Wallace Gilbert, who designed the Firestone factory that doesn't exist anymore, and the Hoover factory in Perivale. It's the largest collection of their buildings anywhere in the world. It looked like that when we bought it, sort of developer porn really, but kind of dereliction, post-industrial dereliction. It had been owned by 2 property developers who had not managed to be able to make it work. This was their marketing suite. So a horrible place, and this is what they put in to attract people to come and visit that site and get excited about it. So we turned it into that. And immediately, just with some paint, I mean, it's literally Dulux paint and an artist, you turn something grim into something beautiful, and people want to be there. So we turned it into a kind of community centre. We opened the doors, got used every day, and it became a place where we could invite people to come and start the conversations about the changing of this place in some warmth and some colour, and just this tiny little corner of this big site, just start to show people the future. We started to make music because obviously being EMI and his master's voice, it was the place where pop music was invented. So we set up a website, called it the Old Vinyl Factory Sessions, and we invited kids to come in their skinny jeans and play acoustic sets in the old buildings in the midst of all the pigeon crap, and make music. So we recorded films of them, and they played their own music and one track that had been originally pressed into vinyl on the site, and that website still runs. And again, nothing really to do with property development, but just a tool and a mechanism to start to be able to engage with people in a creative way that tells some story about the history of the place and how it might have some relevance to now. Quite quickly, we made a 6-meter high sculpture of Nipper the dog that was HMV's famous logo, and installed it as a piece of public art. And now it's this is 4 years ago. Now it's completely landscaped, and that's in its permanent position. So I don't have enough time to tell you in great detail about that project, but over the 9 years that we've been working on that project, it's taken a very long time to turn that place around. But very early on, we needed to engage with people to understand that we needed to change people's perception about that place was not a dead end, miserable post-industrial wasteland, that it was a vibrant, lively place in the middle of a town that needed help. This is an aerial shot of Greenwich. Can you see my cursor? This is Greenwich station on the Greenwich High Road is here. So when you come off the train from central London over here, from the city, this is Greenwich Station, just before you get to Cutty Sark, which is the next station along. This is our site here. It was very small, 2.5 acres of light industrial units that had been vacant for quite some time, effectively one of the gateways to the Royal Borough of Greenwich. We took the site on in 2011, and just as we were demolishing those buildings to start work, the leader of the Royal Borough of Greenwich Council was doing his final walk around his borough to check that everything was spick and span for the opening of the Olympics, which was taking place partly in Greenwich Park. And all of the people who were coming to see the equestrian events were pouring up this little road here to the east of our site. And it was dirty and smelly and a demolition site. So he rang and in a few choice words asked me to stop work on our site and do something fast. And so in 10 days, we shipped in some good old trusty shipping containers and built that. And it stayed there for 3 years. And it was done very fast. Same artist who did the train carriage. And you can see it's down in a dip. And it was in a dip just because we demolished a building that had a basement. And so it was an artist responding to the temporary topography of a corner of our site that had a hole in the ground. And she just built some scaffolding steps around the outside, put marine ply over it. It became a kind of amphitheatre, and put that thing in the middle, which is literally 3 shipping containers and some scaffolding and some painted marine ply. And we put a coffee machine in there, and that turned into a cafe, and it stayed for 3 years. The little auditorium that you can see there of an evening, there were theatre performances, acoustic music, poetry sessions. And it became, again, a place of community engagement. So we used it as a tool for communication. I'm going to speed up. And then the last thing I want to tell you about is my project that I'm working on the most at the moment, this is in Manchester. So this is Edwardian 1910 railway infrastructure. It's a depot underneath the platforms of a station called Mayfield, which is right next to Piccadilly Station in Manchester. This is what we inherited when we took the site, 25 acres of central Manchester. Again, a bit like Deptford High Street. You would not know it was there, even though it's right next to Piccadilly Station and it's 25 huge acres of post-industrial dereliction. And as you open the gates and throw them open and are faced with this, you can imagine the kind of jaw dropping. And this is only a very small part of it. We have so this is what sits on top, the form of platforms. And that's a CGI of our scheme, which you can see the kind of, so the island in the middle, this is the Mancunian Way to the south, railway lines going into Piccadilly Station, which is, can you see my cursor, by the way, David? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
This is Piccadilly Station, and then our site is, our place is this here. It's a Studio Agro West master plan with contributions from S333, Bennett's, Field and Clegg, Bradley, and Morris and Company. It has a 6.5 acre park at the centre of it. And so again, we're having to take 25 acres at the centre of a city that is miserable industrial dereliction. And if you ask people in Manchester where Mayfield is, they make a face and say that they wouldn't really be happy letting their children go anywhere near it when it was getting dusky. It's not a good place. So we have to change people's perception. And so very quickly, so here's just some more of the renderings of the scheme. Those buildings, the tall buildings back there, are AHMM designs. That's our park. So again, this is what it looks like right now. And so we've filled the site as much as we can with stuff. So we have a huge indoor BMX track called Dirt Bikes that is immediately overnight hosting thousands of young people coming and doing BMX training. And we've just spent £1 million turning this into that, which is called Depot, and it's the largest live music venue in the northwest of England. And it, just before lockdown, was hosting 30,000 people a week to 3 club nights a week run by an organisation called the Warehouse Project. And it's a joint venture business with Broadwick Live, which is one of the largest live music venue operators in the UK. So we've invested in turning it quickly. In 6 weeks, we turned that first picture into this picture. And so we have not only a hugely rich engagement tool, but a business that's making, was until we went into lockdown, a very nice return on our money. And then last August, Manchester Pride came to Mayfield and took over the whole of the unused part of the site. 15,000 people came and watched Ariana Grande return to the city and do a gig. So that was a really fast whip through 3 projects that I've worked on in the last few years that just give you some sense of an idea at the beginning of a development project, how we might start to be able to not use that word and talk right from the beginning about it being a place where people will be happy. That's me.
Martyn. Very, very, very inspiring. I mean, it reminds us of the Eindhoven Congress we had last year when the old radio factory,
yes,
similar sorts of process of bringing
what an amazing place that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I went to see Invisible Cities there at the Manchester Festival last year.
We had in that, which it was the opening night of the Depot was Invisible Cities. Yeah,
Ballyrambear and so on. So fantastic. So we've got 2 speakers, both of whom changing attitudes through creativity. I've got a couple of questions coming up on the panel, and I've got a couple of my own as well. But I've got a devil's advocate question from Richard Frieda first. Can I bring Richard in as a direct challenge to what Martyn's been saying? Richard, are you there?
Yes. Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah, it's Martyn's talk, really. I mean, I think it's fantastic what's been described there. And it is a devil's advocate question. It's not my own opinion necessarily at all, but when a property developer of that sort harnesses local creativity, local talent, puts them in the space, uses that to get it off the ground, and what's the long-term effect on local culture and those local people that really did a really great thing to get it going. The cynical view is that the profits don't reach those groups, and those groups have been sort of exploited potentially in a way that doesn't serve the long-term interest of those groups. So I know that I am aware that that's a criticism of that type of work, that it's superficial perhaps and not long-term.
Yeah.
And is that something you've encountered, and how do you respond to that?
It's the biggest problem that we have in engaging in this kind of activity. And it's a really good question to ask. I won't say that we've solved it completely, but every time we do anything like this, we learn a bit better about how to do it. So those pictures I showed you of the arches at Deptford was 12 years ago. And we were quite early in our learning about that then, and we didn't do very well there at that time in Deptford. If we did that again, we would have so much more experience about how to counter the problem that you identify. And the problem is basically twofold. It's about making sure that you don't do the worst definition of gentrification, or the worst definition of just putting some trendy stuff in a place that's got nothing to do with the might get a nice headline in the Evening Standard, but it doesn't have an awful lot to do with the community around it. So you've got to make sure that everything you do is absolutely representative, either absolutely representative of the true community that surrounds that place, or to plug a hole that is something that is not making that community whole, that is a need in that community to make it work better. The second issue is that, of course, building a scheme like that in Deptford, it takes 2 years on site of construction, or at least 2 years on site of construction. And so you spend all this time investing and giving support and help to those people, and then you send them a letter saying, sorry guys, by Friday you've got to be out because the diggers are moving in. We have tried very hard, and I'm not sure we've entirely solved it yet, but we tried very hard to work out how we don't see those people as short-term help to us, but how together we are supporting them starting and nurturing new businesses, and that if their occupation of those sites has to be interrupted at some period, how do we either help them to go somewhere else, having had the support with very low rent, close to zero, and even some money from us to get them going, that they would not have had otherwise. So that means their businesses get a start, and then they might sort of go like little birds on a twig, you know, you shove them off somewhere else, or put them somewhere else temporarily and invite them back in. And that was our intention at Deptford, and it worked with a couple of them. In Manchester, we're 12 years on, we're much better at it. So being able to put that, invest the money and put that live music venue in, which we hope will stay, and we'll build around it if we can, or we move it, or we do something, but we're much better at working out how we connect the early activity to the end result, because it's not, meanwhile use isn't about just doing something pretty while you can, it's about giving a glimpse to the future and experimenting and trying to work out what might work and what might not work. A live music venue might not have worked on that site. Well, it'd be no good if we invested £21 million building a live music venue instead of one in the finished project. So it's about helping everybody in that regard. Sorry, was that a really long answer?
Can I go back to a question that Heather Claridge just asked another question, but I want one for Christopher earlier on about how we get more people to take on board these things. Heather, are you there?
Yes, it was both great presentations. Chris, I was just intrigued with you were sort of suggesting there's new indicators through these kind of hedonistic urbanism that we could be having, and I just wondered if there was any examples of funders adopting them, because quite often funders will be, you know, X number of meters of path or X number of you know, different kinds. So I was just wondering if there was an example of funders sort of adopting these more hedonistic urbanism indicators of success, and if not, how can we influence that?
Very good question. I think interestingly, at the moment, we've probably got the greatest test of it we can have. I mean, at the moment, we've got central government calling on us to make enormous changes to our transport infrastructure in 8 weeks. And I think if to make sort of essentially immediate change like that, we have to basically do projects which come under very little resistance, and actually projects that bring everyone together and actually and that people want. So using things which actually speak to people on the level of humanity and fun and enjoyment is probably one of the easiest ways to actually get things delivered and delivered quickly. I don't know of any sort of formal indicators that sort of start to bound these ideas up, but I mean, once you boil down into the sort of actual infrastructure, then all the infrastructure and all the powers required to deliver the sort of infrastructure I'm talking about, they already exist. So I think it's it's actually just using the sort of mentality to actually deliver projects and deliver them quickly, and how we need them at the moment, if that answers your question.
Which is something we don't have, is it? I mean, my cycle to work has been disrupted for the last year by huge capital works that Manchester are doing to improve cycle lanes, and putting in these massive roundabouts on each junction and so on, whereas a nudge thing might have been much more effective. My question was, why don't we do this? Why do we spend millions on capital projects rather than just change behaviour?
Well, I think it does have to go hand in hand. I mean, to really change behaviour, and if we're going to try and get children to feel comfortable cycling and walking to school, there's going to have to be an element of infrastructure there to support them. And I know that the sort of Manchester projects in terms of the Manchester B lines is looking at this approach. Is sort of how can we spend money very wisely and sort of do small pockets of infrastructure investments, looking at the barriers to walking and cycling, investing money in crossing that barrier, and then entering into these sort of quieter streets, which is it's all a sort of low traffic neighbourhood proposition, and how we actually build neighbourhoods at scale, which actually are sort of small pockets of conviviality, and certainly something we've been looking at in the recent weeks in terms of that sort of sense of community we've been built, and everyone's experiencing the hyperlocal. I mean, how can we actually, with transport infrastructure, how can we sort of reinforce that, protect that, and allow people to move between these cells without tackling the really expensive, really hard, really contested sort of main infrastructure projects like that, because obviously they take time, as Martyn can certainly attest to. And how do we deliver quickly? And I think it has to be that sort of that community level, and focusing on the small interventions that connect communities, which done at scale can be done quickly and actually start to connect cities.
Pam, you've just asked another question. Actually, I was going to bring you in about the question you've asked about measuring fun, but by all means, take the one you've just. I haven't actually read yet, but go ahead, Pam.
Hello. Well, I was going to ask Christopher whether you've looked at social impact evaluation and whether there would be ways of including measures of hedonism. I just love the concept of hedonistic urbanism in that development, which is really in its earliest stages of how we measure social impact. And my second point, really, rather than question, was going to be in terms of avoiding gentrification, basically, the importance of using online tools to broaden the engagement of the widest number of local interests, including those who will never have the confidence or the trust or faith to come to workshops and smart looking cafes. And I absolutely loved everything that you both said, and your slides are fabulous. Please can we have them? And it's just so, if I have 10 seconds, so exciting to have a whole hour talking about positive, wonderful, vibrant engagement and opportunity. So thank you both.
Thank you very much. I think the idea of measuring fun would be phenomenal. And it'd be really nice to explore how we actually start to inputting that. I mean, I was watching a talk by Nick Tyler at UCL this week, talking about his.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, the Person Environment Activity Research Laboratory, which is, I can see why they called it Pearl, yeah. And the idea of speaking to them and maybe sort of boiling down into sort of how we can test and implement these ideas. And yeah, I think.
Can I make an offer there? Because his other laboratory is called Pamela, which I really think is an excellent name for anything. But I'm on the board. I'm involved with the Connected Places Catapult on the neuroscience work that we're doing, and I just think it would be lovely to link you into that if that would be of any interest. I thought Nick Tyler's work is directly relevant.
I agree. It'd be very interesting, and thank you. I'd like to.
Can I come back to Pam on something?
Yeah,
hello, Pam. Yeah. Two things. One, we work with a company called Real Worth, who started as a unit at Salford University, an academic research unit, and has spun out as a private sector consultancy now. And they developed a model of social return on investment, of measuring the social impact return on investment. And I did our first work with them 10 years ago, when they were still an academic unit, and they were looking for a property developer who would be prepared to open their books and allow them access into the mechanics, the financial mechanics of a property development, in order that they could start to test their ideas about how to measure. They have developed now a commercial tool that enables you to measure in pounds and pence index metrics, things like child health, community happiness, community cohesion, all of those, what you might imagine to be intangible things. And they are able to produce a number, a pounds and pence number, that would be in the same sort of cell of a spreadsheet as gross value add in a planning application statement of social impact. And it's incredibly early in its development, and it's, you know, relatively controversial. You could pull it to pieces quite easily, but you've got to start somewhere, and I'm sold on it. I think it's a fantastic way of doing it. It's complicated, and so we're working with them a lot at the moment, and because it just gives us a tool to help us understand whether we're going in the right direction and doing the right thing. It's really important. And then the other thing about, I just want to nail this thing about gentrification, and engaging. It has to be place specific. You have to listen. You have to go and stand on the street and sit in the existing cafes and stand outside the existing shops and understand A, what people who live in that place want to do, and B, what's missing. And so there's got to be some element of your ability to bring something that's not there, that's a different experience than the people who live in a community, because that's maybe why that community isn't working well. You know, I'll tell a as long as you don't tell anyone, all of you hundreds of people out there, I'll tell a story about a little 10-second story about in Lewisham. That was a council project. It was sponsored by the council. It was council-owned land. There was no social housing in that main big building that I showed up on the back of the picture, because on purpose, because the planning policy was to introduce one scheme into the centre of Deptford that would balance out the housing typologies in that very specific part of Deptford town centre. I'm going to say something that sounds glib, but they didn't need any more social housing in that very particular place at that time. The minute that scheme was launched with no social housing in it, and in fact we added some in another building, of course the media went berserk about how can you put, you know, a load of rich people in this thing, couldn't see the council for dust. And so, because that was a very, very tricky and controversial thing, but I still maintained the right thing to do, because to try and balance out the residential typologies on that high street, different kinds of people wanting different things, feeding economic activity on that high street was super important. So I'll hold my hand up to gentrification in its worst description in that environment. But in Manchester, for instance, super important, because there's a park in the middle of that scheme, that what we do is relevant to all the people who live immediately around it. And the only way to do that, get out of your desk and on your feet and go and walk and talk. And use, I will happily say, online engagement tools.
I want to bring one more question in, but actually before I said that, I watched a film this week on Netflix called The Street, about Hoxton Street in London. If you've not seen that, watch it. It completely changed my attitude towards gentrification. It was the most heartrending film you've ever seen, of homeless people sitting outside a new gallery, and watch it anyway. It's amazing. I want to bring in Lydia, if I could. Am I pronouncing that right? Lydia's asked a question about social distancing and these things. This will be the last question, I'm afraid. Is Lydia still with us? Go ahead, Lydia.
Yes, hi. Lydia is correct pronunciation. Sorry for another Corona question, but I was just wondering now, all of my friends who have a balcony, they stayed in London. I stayed in London for a month, but only with a big window and no balcony. So I just wondered, how are developments, especially residential mixed-use developments, changing, and how can we kind of combine where we live, where we say it's not important to have a big view of the skyscrapers of London, but actually a little park surrounded. How can we kind of promote social connectivity within those developments without providing too much private amenity space?
Martyn, is this changing the way that you're thinking about your schemes?
I don't know, I feel like I'm talking too much and Chris needs a voice.
I think it's interesting in terms of, obviously this is going to have, everyone's been speaking about how this current crisis is going to change everything. And I think it's also interesting to reflect on how, as human beings, we have very short memories. I think we need to focus on, as we always have, as we always should, sort of what is good for human beings in cities. I think the idea of development with shared amenities, I think the sort of co-housing model has been having sort of huge success recently, and I think that can still be explored and actually start to deliver a lot more amenity space for people in cities going forward. I think one of the really interesting things is the idea of the front stoop and the front garden and the sort of really quite sort of notionally small but quite impactful spaces we can create that allow people to come together, but actually with a sense of privacy. I think they're incredibly important, and also offer a huge amount to the street and to sort of the community as a whole, in terms of actually animating the street and sort of making a place and a street and a community very welcoming, just by having the kind of a space at the front of a house where people sort of inject a bit of life and character and fun. But I'm sure Martyn has some thoughts as well.
I'm afraid I don't buy this obsession about that we're all going to change the world because of what we've experienced over the last 12 weeks. You know, I find it quite hard to believe that we're all going to be locked back up in our houses again once a year for 3 months for the next 50 years. And what we need to remember is that all of the things that we're now talking about, that Chris has just, you know, some of the things that Chris has just outlined, we know all that stuff is good. We knew it before. We didn't need this thing to tell us that we need more outside space and more green space. It's just about, so for us in our company, I'm just rubbing my hands together with glee over this coronavirus. I mean, apart from obviously, I'm rubbing my hands together with glee over the opportunity that it is presenting for us to have this conversation, to talk about what makes good places. And we know it already. And it's not hard either. You know, we think it's hard to do this stuff, but that's just because my business just tells everyone else it's hard, because it costs money and it costs effort and it takes time and it's hard work. Well, tough. And I think that right now, the best thing that's going to come out of this thing is these conversations, and that we will just have greater chance and better impetus to do good stuff, to put more green space, to put more front gardens, to put more places that are good for children, good for old people, good for disability access, all those things that make us want to understand what's better about the immediate environments around our home. We know all the answers. We just need to do it.
We are drawing to a close. There's just been a great question from Yigong on the comments about why all these locally distinctive regeneration schemes all look the same. Yigong, you there?
Yes.
Listen quickly. We haven't got a lot of time, but I thought it was worth bringing you in.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, I just feel like of many of the examples we've seen in London, like in Shoreditch or the example in Deptford, they have a similar type of style to it. And we've seen many cases happening all over the world, and it's almost like a particular type of style of regeneration or main well use. I was just wondering if that kind of idea is not anymore creative, like we need something new to replace that.
Chris?
Good question.
I mean, in a way, it seems its development is prone to sort of changes in fashion, like everything, isn't it? I mean, if you get a sort of a big expensive fashion house producing something, then you get H&M producing it, then you get these things, and people who really try, and you and I are definitely the ones who deliver sort of really unique and great places, and then that's going to get copied because people think, oh, that's new and unique and great and interesting, so let's copy that. So the more development which can be striving for the skies, like a lot of the work that you and I does, then if people start copying good, then that's only good.
Sorry, Chris, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, but obviously it has to be founded in place as you may.
It does, but it's also a function of our industry, which is demand and supply. You know, when demand for residential property constantly outstrips supply, it means everything that gets built sells, and therefore the people doing the building and the selling have got no incentive to any competitive incentive to listen to what people want. That has to change. The world of consultation that Pam knows about, online consultation, the world of politics around this, so terrible things like Grenfell, it have an impact, have a good impact on these things, because we are never ever going to not be able to we're not going to not listen to people after that terrible tragedy. And so people's voices are getting louder. People's voices who use and live in places are getting louder. In our industry, both as designers and developers, we have to listen. And if you listen, you not only will do the right thing, but you'll get better schemes and better products, and they will make more money and everybody will be happier. It's not rocket science, it really isn't.
Thank you. I need to draw that to a close. Thank you for another fantastic Urbanism lunch hour. Inspiring presentations from Christopher and Martyn, for which we're thankful. If we were in the same room, we would clap now, but so if you can see me, clap. Do we have a slide, Olga, about next week's session? Here we go. Urbanism lunch hour next week is going to be, if that flips over, I get rid of my chat. Professor Greg Clark, Chair of Connected Cities Catapult, and Dr. John Montgomery, Shaping Health Economies Across Towns and Regions, two more great speakers. So please all tune again next week. Thank you very much for this session, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.